Today, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, one of the most challenging books of the 20th century, Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. This is a raw, unflinching look at colonialism and the fight for freedom, and it's going to force us to grapple with some really uncomfortable ideas. And right out of the gate, Fanon hits us with a question that's at the very heart of his work. Is violence ever actually necessary to achieve freedom? Now, for him, this wasn't just some abstract debate. It's the central, unavoidable question that his entire analysis of colonialism revolves around. To really get a handle on Fanon's work, it helps to think of him as more than just a revolutionary. Think of him as a doctor. He was a psychiatrist by trade, and he approaches colonialism almost like a disease, diagnosing its deep psychological sickness and then prescribing a radical and, often painful cure. And Fanon's own life was his laboratory, really. He was born in the French colony of Martinique, studied psychiatry in France, but the real turning point was when he started working as a psychiatrist in Algeria, right in the middle of its brutal war for independence. So for him, this wasn't theory. He was on the front lines, treating the deep psychological wounds of both the colonized people and their colonizers. Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of Fanon's diagnosis, his central idea about the language of colonialism. And for Fanon, that language, inescapably, is violence. So, this is absolutely crucial to understand. For Fanon, colonialism isn't just accompanied by violence, it is founded on violence. It's not a bug in the system, it's the entire operating system. The very act of creating and maintaining a colony is, at its core, a violent act. And he breaks this down into three connected layers. First, you've got the obvious physical violence, the police, the soldiers, the suppression of any dissent. But just as important, he says, is this psychological violence, the constant messaging that makes the colonized feel inferior, that makes them doubt their own culture and their own worth. And finally, you've got the structural violence that's just baked into the whole system, the economic and legal rules that are designed to keep one group on top and the other at the bottom. And this is where we get to the most challenging paradox in Fanon's thinking. On the one hand, violence is the main tool of the oppressor, used to control and dehumanize. But, and this is his most controversial point, he argues that for the colonized, responding with violence can act as what he calls a cleansing force. It's this tragic, but he says necessary act to reclaim a stolen sense of humanity and to shatter those psychological chains of submission. So you have to ask, how does a system like this justify all that violence? Well, Fanon argues that it does it by building a very specific psychological world. You literally have to divide the world and everyone in it in two. He calls this mindset Manichaeism. Now, that's a big word from an old religion, but the concept is actually pretty simple. It just means a worldview that sees everything in black and white. There's no gray area, no nuance, it's just a constant battle of pure good versus pure evil. This table here just lays it out perfectly. The colonial system creates this rigid, split reality. The colonizer's world is always framed as good, civilized, orderly, light. And the world of the colonized is defined as its exact opposite: evil, primitive, violent, dark. And this isn't just about drawing lines on a map, it's a moral map, and it's designed to make exploitation seem natural and justified. And that leads to another one of Fanon's really profound insights. He says that in a colony, nothing is neutral. The very infrastructure, we're talking roads, schools, hospitals, is also part of the power structure. They are all built, both physically and in our minds, to reinforce the colonizer's power. And that divided world we just looked at. But okay, what happens when the colonizers are finally kicked out? What happens next? Fanon was incredibly worried about the aftermath, warning everyone about all these new traps that can pop up, even after you seemingly won your freedom. He saved some of his sharpest, most blistering criticism for a group he called the national bourgeoisie. So this is the local elite, often educated in the West, who step in to take power right after independence. And while they look like the face of a new free nation, Fanon saw them as fundamentally, and this is his word, useless when it comes to bringing about real revolutionary change. So why such a harsh judgment? Well, because in Fanon's view, this new elite doesn't actually want to tear down the old system. They just want to sit in the seats of power that the colonizers left behind. So instead of transforming society, they just end up copying the old structures, focusing on getting rich themselves, and basically acting as middlemen for their former colonial masters. It's just exploitation under a new flag. So this book was written over 60 years ago. Why are we still talking about it? Because Fanon's analysis of power, of oppression, and of what liberation really means, well, it still echoes in struggles for justice all over the world today. And one of his most powerful ideas that's really lasted is this: decolonization isn't just a political fight or an economic one, it's also a cultural war. Reclaiming a nation's culture, its history, its language, its art, that's not some fluffy distraction from the real revolution. For Fanon, it is a revolutionary act. It is a form of combat. This chart does a great job of showing his complete vision of freedom. As you can see, just getting political independence, a new flag, a new government, that's only a piece of the puzzle. Without real economic self-determination and, crucially, a cultural and psychological rebirth, Fanon believes that liberation would always be incomplete. True freedom is about changing minds just as much as it's about changing borders. And this brings us all the way back to the title of the book, The Wretched of the Earth. What is so profound about this is that Fanon isn't just taking pity on the oppressed, he's completely reframing them. In his eyes, they are not passive victims just waiting around to be saved. No, they are the true agents of history, the ones who actually have the power and the will to change the world. And so, we're going to end where we started, with a question for you. Fanon wrote about colonialism, but his breakdown of systemic oppression, how it works on our bodies, in our minds, and in our societies, that's timeless. It forces us to ask, in a world that is still dealing with such deep inequality, what does true, meaningful liberation really require from all of us today?